Hey guys, this is Jason. Today I am ending the Back to the Future binge with Back to the Future Part 3, which of course is going to be filled with spoilers just like the first two reviews were. It is once again directed by Robert Zemekis, and it once again stars Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Leah Thompson, Thomas F. Wilson, and one new cast member, Mary Steenbergen. And this film takes place right where Part 2 left off, when Marty finds 1955 Doc and has to get his help to go back to the year 1885 to get his Doc back. And that is in the Old West, where Doc Brown is now a blacksmith, but Marty has to take him back to 1985 because he finds out that if Doc stays in 1885, Buford Tannen will shoot him in the back and kill him, meaning that Marty won't be able to go back to his own time without him. But then things get really complicated when Doc falls in love with a girl named Clara Clayton, played by Mary Steenbergen, and that kind of puts him in a tough situation where he either has to stay in 1885 or go back to the year 1985. This is the third and final film in the Back to the Future trilogy that I did watch a few times as a kid, not as much as Part 2, but I still have a fun time with this film because I want to have the conclusion, and after rewatching this film for this review, I still think it's a fun time. I still think it's a satisfying conclusion. It does have issues for sure, and I still don't love it as much as the first Back to the Future film, and I think I might like the second film just a little bit more than this one. It does have some things that are dated and some parts of the story that are a little familiar, which I'll talk about those later. Now, besides the opening and the ending of this film, most of this film takes place in the Old West, which makes this film feel like it's sort of different for the setting, not for the plot. The plot is still the same. So after Marty takes 1955 Doc back to his home, he shows him the 1985 Doc's letter that he gave Marty in the end of the second film, where he learns that he's a blacksmith and he has a nice life in the Old West. But when Marty finds the tombstone of Emmet Brown and learns that he gets shot by Buford Tannen, that gets Marty to realize, no, I have to take him back to our own time and take him home. And Marty does go to the year 1885 to save him, but unfortunately the time machine that he's in was the same time machine that the 1985 Doc was in when it was struck by lightning that took him to 1885. So when Marty finds the time machine buried underground for 70 years, it's not really working for him because it's kind of falling apart. It's leaking gas after he accidentally ripped the fuel line. It needs new tires, and it's gotten very old, so it's not completely useful for Marty when he has to go back to save Doc. And that gets things complicated for both Marty and Doc when they have to figure out what to get the time machine to work on, because they don't have any gas, and they try different alcohols from a bar and none of them work, unfortunately. And they find out that this train can only go 50 miles per hour, so they have to figure out how to make the train go faster than that. And both of them have a week to figure out how to get this time machine to work and how they can get the train to go faster than 50 miles before Doc gets shot. While in the meantime, Marty is still trying to get used to being in the Old West, because the Old West has a lot of things that Marty is not used to doing. Like, he has to learn how to ride on a horse, he has to learn to dress like a cowboy, he has to get used to drinking dirty water, he has to get used to eating food with a little bit of dirt on it, and has to change his name to Clint Eastwood and dress like him with a poncho and everything. And Marty and Doc later get to see the clock get hung up in the clock tower, the same clock tower that gets struck by lightning in the end of the first film, where they use that to help Marty get back to his time. And pretty early on in the film, we see Marty run into Biff's great-grandfather, Buford Mad Dog Tannen, played by Thomas F. Wilson. And I guess Wilson has to play all of Biff's ancestors, like Buford in this film and Griff in the second film, and we see that Buford Tannen is actually just as bad as Biff. Leah Thompson is also back as Lorraine briefly in the end, and most of the film as Maggie McFly, and we later see that Michael J. Fox is playing both Marty McFly and Seamus McFly as well. And similar to Part 2, we get some scenes where both Marty and Seamus are in the same scene together, and they're both played by the same actor, except in this film, it looks a lot more dated than it did in part 2. Now, the second film does have those moments too, but they're not as dated or as noticeable as they do in part 3. Like, you can really tell it doesn't hold up anymore. Like, with some of the lighting and the green screen that they would use for when two of those characters are in the same scene together, you can really tell that it doesn't look that real. And since I'm getting to some of my issues, I will say that my big issue with this film is that the story feels a little too similar to the first film. Like, there's one scene where Marty is getting chased by Tannen and his gang, just like he was being chased by Biff in the first film and chased by Griff in the second film. Doc has a whole setup in his lab explaining how he would get the time machine to go back to 1985, just like he had a whole plan in the first film. And Clara knocks on Doc's door and Marty and Doc have to hide the time machine, just like in the first film when Lorraine knocks on Doc's door and they have to cover the time machine. There's even a scene where Marty wakes up in bed and Leah Thompson is there trying to wake him up, and he's thinking that he's in a dream but then realizes that it's real. And that kind of scene is in all three of these films. I mean, maybe I can give that part a pass because maybe they were just doing it for comedy, but at the same time, it still feels like something that we've already seen before, which is why this film does at times feel like a copy of the first film, except it's in the Old West. Now, this doesn't mean that this is a bad film. This is not a terrible film. This is still a really good movie. It's just that I couldn't help but see those comparisons. After Marty shows Doc the picture of his tombstone from 1955, that does get Doc freaked out and try to think of a plan to go back until he rescues a girl named Clara, played by Steenbergen, that he immediately falls in love with and starts to forget about the future and the possible death that he's gonna get from Tannen, which those two are actually pretty good together. I think Christopher Lloyd and Mary Steenbergen do have nice chemistry together. It's not overly dramatic, it's not one of the weaker parts of the film. I actually think it's one of the stronger parts of the film, and it definitely elevates more of the emotion that Doc gets later in the film, and makes Doc more sympathetic because in the first two films he was more interested in science. He didn't have time to make a life and fall in love with someone around him. But here, when he falls in love with Clara, you see that relationship grow throughout the film, and he starts to see that he's actually happy with Clara, and he's happy being in 1885, and that makes us happy for Doc throughout the film. But at the same time, it also makes us feel sad about Doc because we realize that he doesn't belong in this time period and has to go back or else he's gonna get killed. And when Doc realizes that, he tries to break up with her by saying goodbye to her and tries not to tell her the truth for a little bit until he decides to after she tells him if he really loves her that he would tell her the truth. And of course, she doesn't believe him and thinks that he's taking advantage of her, and that actually makes Doc really sad when that happens. Like, when that moment was happening, I actually felt bad for Doc because he felt happy with her in this time period. And while Doc's love life is very complicated, things are more complicated for Marty when he accepts this standoff with Tannen on the day that Doc was supposed to die, except Marty unintentionally changed that, meaning that Doc's name on a tombstone has been completely erased, but only just his name, not the entire tombstone, which means that Tannen is the one that's gonna kill Marty, and his name, Clint Eastwood, is gonna be on that tombstone, meaning the roles have already been switched around. And this also relates to Marty's arc throughout this film and in the second film, where he gets annoyed and angry whenever someone calls him chicken or yellow, because he doesn't like to take crap from either Biff or Griff or Tannen, because whenever Marty does get upset when someone calls him chicken, that would later get him really upset and get him into trouble. And really, Marty has to learn to let that go, or else he's gonna be in that accident that Doc accidentally mentioned to him. That accident they briefly mentioned in part 2 when we see future Marty McFly being not the greatest self. And of course, we're gonna talk a little bit more about that accident later in this video. though. And all that comes to the big finale when Marty has to go against Tannen and has to realize that he shouldn't really take all of that crap from anyone. And when Tannen just keeps calling him yellow and he's counting down for him to come out and be a man, Marty realizes that he's not gonna listen to that jerk. He doesn't care about what anyone says anymore. He's gonna try to let that go. And when Marty does come out and face off Tannen, Tannen ends up shooting him already, and everyone is surprised and shocked at first until Marty kicks the gun off of Tannen's hand and Tannen punches him in the chest, and we later see that the metal plate on his chest was under his poncho the whole time, referencing the Fistful of Dollars film that Biff was watching in the second film, which starred Clint Eastwood himself. And then Marty kicks Tannen's ass and makes him fall in the manure, making the whole Tannen family known for getting their asses kicked by the McFlys. And then after that scene, we get Marty and Doc trying to steal a train and have it go more than 50 miles per hour with 3 logs that Doc made himself, and get to the time machine so that the time machine can go 88 miles per hour. And then after Clara later finds out that Doc was telling the truth the whole time, she tries to find him and follow the train that they're on so that she can tell him how she really feels about him, and then she tries to follow them, which leads to them finally getting together. But then things go crazy when all 3 of these logs blow up until they get to the red log, causing the train to go super fast and causing Clara to fall down with her dress getting caught on the train. And Doc is trying to reach out for her, and then Marty brings out the hoverboard he got from the second film, gives it to Doc, and Doc rides on it and catches Clara from falling, which that is a great scene, by the way, because you get to see the characters go through a fast train and you want to see them live through this whole scene. And then Marty does attempt to unfortunately get back to 1985 without Doc and ends up on Eastwood Ravine, which now that there's a ravine that's sort of named after Marty, even though he didn't go by McFly when he was in the Old West. But then unfortunately another train comes by and destroys the entire time machine after Marty gets out of it, and now the time machine is destroyed just like Doc wanted throughout part 2 and 3, so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands again, and that they don't unintentionally change more the timeline. Marty finds Jennifer, wakes her up, and they go in his new truck to drive to the crash site where the time machine was destroyed, where we later see Needles, played by Flea, who also played the same character in part 2, who got the future Marty fired, challenges him to a race with the new truck that Marty refuses at first, but of course Needles calls him chicken for that. And once Needles takes off, Marty decides to drive backwards, not taking the race, getting him to avoid the accident that Doc mentioned earlier in the film, completely erasing the bad part of Marty's future and giving him a possible better one. And after Marty and Jennifer go to the crash site, all of a sudden another time machine comes around as a train, and he sees that Doc is back and is now married to Clara, and they have kids now, giving Marty the picture that both him and Doc took with the clock before it got hung up, giving us a very satisfying conclusion to the Back to the Future trilogy. For me, Back to the Future Part 3 isn't an amazing film. It does have some issues, like the plot being a little similar to the first film, and some green screen and lighting that doesn't really hold up for some scenes anymore. And now to compare all 3 of these films, now I've already reviewed all 3 of them, I think parts 2 and 3 haven't aged that well. They're still a lot of fun to watch, they're still great, but they haven't aged that well compared to the first film, like with the whole 2015 scene in part 2 not being like the same 2015 that we did in real life, and some of the stuff in part 3 where it feels similar to the first film. But it's still a really fun movie. I did enjoy watching the film. I still love the chemistry between Marty and Doc, and I even like the chemistry between Doc and Clara throughout the film. And easily the best thing about both this film and the whole trilogy is just the chemistry between Marty and Doc. They easily make this film and the whole trilogy feel watchable and a lot of fun. It still has a lot of stuff we love from the first film, like the directing editing, Alan Silvestri's score, the cinematography, and it's just a very fun time and is a very good ending to a really fun trilogy. I'm gonna give Back to the Future Part 3 a B+. Yeah, I know it's the same grade I gave Part 2, but that's just how I feel, even though I like Part 2 just a little bit more than the third film, because the second film feels more like a dark thriller at times. And those are my thoughts on all three of the Back to the Future films. It's a very fun trilogy that is still very enjoyable to watch, and I'm glad that Hollywood hasn't decided to make a fourth film in this franchise, and I don't want them to at all, because if they made a fourth film now, then it would probably be the first bad Back to the Future film, and no one wants that. We already have a good ending for Back to the Future. We don't need a fourth film. We don't need any more. So guys, if you have seen Back to the Future Part 3, which I hope you have because I spoiled a ton of stuff throughout this video, so if you haven't seen the film and you are watching this video, then I'm sorry if I ruined the film for you. But if you have already seen the film, let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing, because helps my channel grow. Hit the notification bell so you know what other videos I'm posting. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.